Well, we'll get started, and as the other women join, then they can catch up with us. So welcome, ladies, and good morning. Thank you for being here. Lovely to see you all. So those of you who have been here before or been part of our Women in Tech community, then you'll know we're quite a friendly bunch. So we will kind of involve you, and also it's a very supportive group. Do feel free to be open and share your ideas and thoughts. So today's session is going to be all about how to be an effective leader in today's world. As we know, the past year has changed a lot. People's mindsets have changed, but also the ways of working has changed. So today's session hopefully will help you get prepared for now as we're coming out of lockdown, how to be an effective leader and the tools and things that you need to get prepared for, but also to get you in the best place possible for leading your teams. Holly, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So a little bit about Crimson, for those who don't know who we are. So we were established 20 years ago now. We are now part of also the global group, the Harvey Nash Group, which is amazing. So we're a recruitment and also solutions business. So we're a Microsoft Gold partner and also an IT recruitment business. We also run several IT leadership workshops throughout the year, both around digital, but also CIO and kind of candidate driven. And also we have an innovation conference each year as well. So if you aren't familiar with those, do let me know and I'll send you some details as soon as we have them. So a little bit about our Women in Tech community. So I started this, I would say just over a year ago now, I think it is. I think, yeah, the year before last, so probably a year and a half. We started out by running in-person events before obviously COVID happened. And the idea that I wanted to create was to have a supportive group of women to be able to get together, share ideas, get interesting speakers, but also feel like you're part of something and that we can learn together, evolve together also. We've had to obviously move it online, but as soon as we can go back to in person, we definitely will. So very open discussions. There's no judgment around here. So do feel free to ask any question. No question is a silly question. Find solutions. So if you've got a problem, just bring it to us and we'll either try and get a speaker for you for the next event, but also we can try and answer it there and then. Maybe someone in the group can help you. Open discussions and also to have fun and meet others. It's a very kind of relaxed setting and we're all friendly. So hopefully you'll enjoy being part of the group if you're new, and if you've come back, then again, welcome back. A little bit about me. So I started my career at the Harvey Nash Group as the CIO researcher, then moved into a consultant role before moving internally at Holland & Barrett as a resource partner. And then I came over to Crimson almost 6 years ago now to again do CIO headhunting before I moved into strategic partnerships. So I've had a lot going on, and for those of you who know me as well, I'm very involved in our workshops and events, so around personal branding and development. So I've got a passion for that, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing as well. And fitness, obstacle courses, I think I'm probably a bit mad, but I enjoy doing those kind of things like Tough Mudders. Don't know how I've got through each one of them, but I have. And yeah, I got a dog in lockdown, which I think a lot of people did, but here's my little baby now, so that's what I am also spending my time doing. So more importantly, today's speakers, it's not speak about me anymore. So we've got the amazing Rachel. I think some of you might have met Rachel before. She spoke for us twice now at our Women in Tech events, both in Birmingham and London. So she's been an OG and an amazing for us. So thank you, Rachel. So Rachel's got over 25 years experience in international talent management, leadership development and commercial business leadership. So today she's going to be talking you through what we've learned in the pandemic and also some tools and what we can take moving forward. So it's going to be really an interesting session and hopefully you enjoy it. And then we've got the amazing Laura Lawrence. Again, Laura's been a kind of friend to Crimson and has been part of Crimson community for quite a while now, and also amazing with 25 years experience in a range of senior management roles and also a trusted advisor for senior execs as well. And Laura's going to be talking around how to be a competent leader in today's world. So again, another really interesting session that we've got lined up for you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it and take something from it. We'll get started. So over to you, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keisha. I'm really happy to be here, and I hope you're all full of bounce at this time in the morning and ready to think about leadership. So really want to focus this session on what we've learned during the pandemic. I really love this photo that I took in Iceland. I don't know, some of you may recognize it from Reykjavik. It's a picture of a guy with a a rock on his head. And I think there's a danger that we're going to come out of this pandemic experience not really taking time to reflect on what we've learned, to think about, as leaders, what are the really key messages that we've taken away from it, to think about what worked really well, what didn't, and what's different, because there's a huge amount that's different. I was on an international call the other day with the US and Africa, looking at organizational development. And one of the conversations we were having around the speed of change and the speed of changing culture in organizations. And one of the things we talked about was the fact we've demonstrated in the last year how quickly we can change if there's a really important reason for us to do so. We've all changed our behaviour significantly. And I think we've all proved that we're incredibly adaptable and resilient. And so what have we learned from that, and what can we take forward? Holly is going to do my next slide, because I'm going to do a bit of a Chris Whitty with her. So we're going to do a poll now, and we're going to do 2 polls during this session, and some breakout rooms and some feedback. So I hope you're all on your toes, because it's going to be a pretty quick romp through leadership. So Holly, can you put the poll up for us now? Also, just to say, it's confidential, so we won't see what you vote. So don't worry about being completely honest, because no one will know what you voted for. Oh, interesting. It's quite evenly balanced at the moment. Are people being shy? No, we're getting some more. Great. I don't know how many more responses we're waiting for, Holly. Oh, okay. Okay, so it looks like actually it's relatively well balanced between changing my career, my purpose, my role, my organisation. So, okay, with my role and my organisation slightly in the lead. So as we're talking about leadership, I thought I'd just give us a definition. I'd highly recommend CCL as a website to have a look at if you want to find some leadership information and free podcasts and white papers and things. It's really great. I used to work for them a few years ago. But I always thought this definition of leadership, although slightly Western, is quite helpful as a frame. It's really simple, and I like really simple things, although you won't say that when you see my next slide. So leadership's defined as a social process. Clearly, leadership is all about relationships with others. We can't lead entirely on our own. Firstly, it's about direction. So an agreement on what's the collective way forward. What are we looking to achieve together? Of course, that could be lots of different things depending on the type of organisation you work for. Alignment, so coordination, bringing everything together, ensuring that you've got the right people in the right place, the right resources. And then commitment, people have actually committed to it with their hearts as well as their heads. So people want to deliver and want to move towards the direction that you're all going in. That's obviously often the most challenging part. Ollie, can you move on to the next slide? Thank you. So this is taken from 10 years worth of research on teams. I've slightly adapted this diagram to fit my purposes. And what I wanted to show you in this was the complexity of the environment that we're working in. Many of you will be aware of this. You're in technology, you know all about complexity. But I think sometimes, although what we want to achieve as leaders is fairly straightforward, as is demonstrated in the last slide, making it happen is the really, really challenging part. And so I think this gives a really fantastic overview of all the different aspects of leadership that we need to think about. We need to think about the external environment, and clearly this has been very much front of mind in the last year and a half, and will continue to be so going forward. And in fact, many of us still don't know what the future holds. Although we're out of a pandemic in the UK, we're in an endemic now. Of course, the rest of the world, and looking what's going on in India, is still suffering, and there's still a long way to go until we can return to any kind of normality. So the external environment, the business context, the political, economic, social, technological, which you're all involved in, legal and environmental context. Then you've got your external stakeholders. So again, this has been very much sort of in the front of our minds during the last year about creating stakeholder value and shareholder value. Also looking at community and society. What are we doing in terms of environmental issues as organizations? So huge pieces of aspects and things for us to think about in terms of our wider context. And then once we come into the organization, bearing in mind all those forces are influencing us, we're then looking at both the structural, so how the organization is set up, the compositional, who's there, what's our talent, who's there to deliver our direction, and the mediating mechanisms in terms of the relationships and how we work with each other. So a lot of complexity there. I'm going to come on and talk about that a little bit in more detail. So Holly, can we come to the next slide, please? I did say this is going to be a romp because we've only got half an hour. So structural features. So this is really the direction aspect of leadership. There's a lot of evidence and research that really leaders now need to be cognizant with organizational design. So organizational design should be aligned with what the direction of the organization, what you're trying to achieve, what your strategy is. And leaders really need to understand if the way their organization is designed and structured is working for them or it isn't. And I think this is massively important because I can think of systemic team coaching assignments that I've done where actually the focus has been on the relational side, on managing stakeholders, the external environment. But if I reflect back, actually there were some fairly significant structural issues to why the leadership team was having real challenges. The organization was not set up, or I guess it wasn't aligned, and it wasn't there to deliver what they wanted to do. The structure was playing against them. So I think this is a really important part of leadership, and often one that's forgotten. Technology, obviously, you'll know about, so I won't come on to that. And of course, now we're moving into the world of hybrid working versus face-to-face working, and how all that's going to be structured. So I guess for you, maybe this is an area you're spending more time in than many other leaders do. And I'm sure that you'll have experienced times when the structure's playing against what you're trying to do from a technological aspect. Holly, could we go on to the next slide? Thank you. This is massively important as well, and clearly this is an area that Keisha and Holly are involved with in terms of people, and have you got the right talent? So thinking here about team churn, once upon a time we thought about teams as static, that the changes didn't happen a lot. It was the same people in the team month on month. We all now know that that's not true, and that very often when I'm working with teams, I start at the beginning of the year, and by the end of the year, the team is different. So that's a really important thing for us to think about in terms of leadership. The team ability, have you got the right capabilities in place? The fault lines, where are the weaknesses? Where are the areas we need to be paying attention to in terms of our people and who we've got and the resources that we need? Have we got the right demographics? Are we looking at diversity? And then finally, have we got the right functional expertise? And have we also got diversity in terms of personality type? So that's diversity of thought. So all of those areas are important. And then finally, the third aspect of leadership, looking at the relationships, both within your teams and externally outside. When I use the word stakeholders now, I'm very kind of cognizant of what's been going on in the football news, and calling fans stakeholders. So when I say stakeholders, I mean key decision makers. So here, looking at people's motivation, whether there's conflict, both internally or externally. Conflict can be a really healthy thing, provided it's something that will deliver positive outcomes and the intentions behind it are positive. Also thinking about how you share information. As we all know, information is power in organizations. What action you're taking, how you're transitioning, how you're allowing for creativity, and really importantly and finally is their trust. So this is the more emotional, if you like, and relational side of leadership. So that just summarizes very, very quickly a lens for you all to think about and reflect on leadership. And we're going to put you all into breakout rooms, fingers crossed, provided the technology works, to talk about really your experience of leadership through the last year. So if you just think about through the last year, bearing in mind the lens we've just looked at and the different ways of thinking about leadership, what's worked well for you as a leader and what hasn't? What have you done differently that's had the most impact? And that could actually be positive and negative, but let's try and err on the side of positivity here. And what can we play forward as we're coming out of a pandemic into an endemic, and then hopefully at some stage in the future going back to some sort of normality? What do we need to remember and learn and take play forward with us? So I think Holly hopefully is going to put you all into discussion.
I'm going to try and do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Keisha.
So,
and I would say don't spend a lot of time doing introductions because we've only got 15 minutes. So let's make it pacey, and we look forward to hearing back from you when you come back in the room.
And if it does kick you out, ladies, when you try to join back, just rejoin, because sometimes that happens. So it's not that we've booted you out. So yeah. And what I'll do is I'll put these questions in the chat window just in case you can't see it, because again, it might not work. So yeah, see you shortly.
Thanks, Keisha.
Bye-bye.
Back in the room.
Back in the room. Keisha, will you let me know when everyone's back?
It looks like most people are back now.
We did get kicked out, Rachel, but everyone can log back in, so that's fine.
Good. Brilliant. Okay, so couple of things. Firstly, just to say, anyone who has recently joined that wasn't there at the beginning, there's a poll in chat, so please vote. That will be brilliant because we'd love to see what your view is. It is confidential, so don't worry about being identified. So it just comes up as a summary total. And then what we'd love to hear from you both in chat, and please feel free to unmic and speak. We'd love to see you. Is your feedback on that little discussion. So what can we apply to our leadership now and in the future? And how do you think leadership might be different in a post-pandemic world? So please feel free to jump in and share your contributions. We'd love to hear from you.
I'll go to Rebecca Fox. I had Emma and Gwen in my group, and we talked and we talked about leadership, and we've all got different kind of backgrounds, but we talked about the things that we've learned was probably, and we'll start with the last one, so just having a lot more compassion for people, so actually people in lots of different circumstances, but also just how much more trust we had in people just to get stuff done. And I can't, Emma, what was the other one we had? I was going to say loyalty. Was it loyalty? I've just dragged them in the conversation. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think we. I think it was the trust in people to just get it done. I think to just be more sort of empathic where perhaps we might not have been previously. just sort of resetting our expectations of individuals. So, you know, where so from my point of view, I had a team that's always been certainly over the last couple of years, we've built to be a very high performing team. So I'd complete trust in them. There were weaker members of the team, certainly, but the pandemic meant that people just had to work in different ways, or they were just, in some circumstances, working at a fraction of where they had been previously. And then from my perspective, I had to adjust to accept that. Because of the situation, it brought up what we were talking about in our group, was actually people's individual circumstances always come to work, but there was so much more of that, of that was exposed, that we then as managers needed to take account of and understand. And actually, life is like that normally, isn't it, in lots of ways? So actually, isn't that a positive thing to sort of take away?
Yeah. So humanity, I think we've all got more humanity, haven't we? We all realise, I think, what people are experiencing more maybe than we knew it was there, but it's much more front and centre now. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else would like to add?
Lou, are you here? Can you hear us? I know Lou's just messaged so she can't access the chat.
Hi, I can. My chat function's not working off my phone, but we had a really good discussion group, actually. Unfortunately, we just cut one of the ladies off who had some really good points around the fact that none of her team have been able to go back into an office at all as yet, and may not be able to the end of the year. We talked a lot about last year in terms of that over communicating. You know, it really became important to almost over communicate and make sure you could communicate in many different forms. Because for me as a leader, it really highlighted even more, even though we're a sales team, and obviously a lot of our team are very self-confident and have lots of outward skills naturally, it really honed in on those individuals who felt it difficult to sometimes express themselves on virtual chats and meetings, etc. And so we were talking a lot about people feeling quite isolated and sometimes not feeling as engaged as they'd like. But then going forward, my challenge, I think, and some of the others shared, is trying to get that balance of, encouraging people to go back to the office, but making sure that those visits are relevant, are useful, have a clear agenda, so that it's not just for the sake of it. So there's a combination of needing that mental health support and people feeling that they can be around people and can start collaborating and kind of, actually it's a big thing for a lot of people still to come and meet with people generally, and we talked a lot about that. So getting that balance right versus obviously not doing it for the sake of it and making it purposeful, and obviously having a bit more professional courtesy around the team meetings and the Zoom meetings, and trying to avoid that sort of Zoom fatigue, as it were, that we've all experienced, and all of that. So a few challenges there, but on the whole, it was a good thing that people felt they'd really had a lot more empathy and had a lot more understanding, like the previous persons just said, in terms of their team's situations and life at home, and everyone's got a lot more patience and consideration for each other.
Yeah. So again, sort of a big focus on the whole emotional, relational side is what I'm hearing. Anyone else want to add anything?
Do you want me to summarise our group, Rachel?
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you. Thanks, Laura.
So I had Heidi, Kerry, Jackie and Andrea, who's a Crimson apprentice. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But very much we talked about internal communications, pastoral care. And actually, Heidi had a very interesting perspective on culture. So she's been dealing with an Indian team, and that whole pastoral care and internal communications across cultural divides was very interesting. She brought out some things that they'd been working on. But I think the key thing that people talked about was that, these are my words, not theirs, by the way, they're starting to systemize these. So very much the point that Lou was just talking about, making sure things are purposeful, writing down how things are going to proceed forward post the pandemic, particularly in that kind of cultural divide piece as well, which it sounded like it involved quite a bit of education as well. And then Andrea was quite interesting because obviously she joined Crimson during the pandemic. So this has been a norm for her. So that was interesting too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Laura. That's great. And one of the things I'm just looking at here, if we go back to the poll around what are you looking to change, it's interesting that we've now got 33% are looking to change their roles. So, you know, whilst I'm hearing that there's a real focus of attention on relationships and purpose and how we lead, there's also a sense perhaps that people, maybe some of the people on the line, haven't been supported themselves by their organisation. I'm intrigued why people are looking to change roles, or it might be a positive thing and maybe people are looking to take on more responsibility, but it'd be interesting to hear from people about that as well. Has anyone else got any other comments or questions?
Rachel, can I just ask one thing that's really playing on my mind at the moment, and it's around sort of performance actually and productivity. And if you have individuals who for whatever reason just are not only struggling but also the performance and everything has just dropped, it's so difficult to address that, I think, personally at the moment, and how to best manage that in a considered, compassionate but also effective way without it's so much more difficult to have difficult conversations over Teams.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'm a coach. I'm doing all my work virtually at the moment. So it was a big adjustment for me to do that. I mean, I've done some work like that, but I never did 100% of my work like that. I think it's a really interesting question that you raise, and I would say I think it's twofold. So I think partly it comes from us. So it's partly our own insecurities about working in that way online because we're not used to doing that. So we're not used to having difficult conversations with people through a laptop or a computer. We're used to kind of maybe taking people for a coffee or going for a walk or going into a meeting room. And we're missing that kind of body language and that whole kind of how we are with people through the screen. So I think some of that comes from us. And then I agree with you. I think it is challenging. And I think there's something about taking a little bit more time maybe than you would normally. So I think things can come across quite starkly on the screen. And also one of the other things I notice is that people are sometimes more open because remembering that when they're sitting in their own homes, so they're in a comfortable space, and sometimes people overshare things in a way that you maybe wouldn't do if you were in an office. So I think we have to be mindful of those two things. And I would just say, Louise, just take your time and do it over, you know, just start the conversations going and don't feel you have to address everything all in one go. But I completely hear you.
Thank you, Rachel. That makes perfect sense and sort of resonates with what I'm feeling. But obviously, having had two people on board in my team actually virtually, I think that's obviously of a challenge because you don't have that, you know, the comfort factor of knowing that person and having that extra empathy. But really great points. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anyone else got anything, or we'll move on to the next piece? Okay, brilliant. So we're going to launch another poll, and we're going to think about your leadership priority going forward. I think we might know the answer to this given the feedback that we've had already, but I'd be interested in just confirming that. So your priority going forward is the structure. So you're looking at organizational design and decision making. Talent, you're looking at your recruitment, retaining and diversifying your teams. Relationships, so how you're all working together and outside of your team. And then learning, are you going to spend time with your teams having conversations like we've had today, thinking about what they've learned over the last year, and what's been challenging and what's worked really well. And actually, back to Lou's point, that could be a good way of surfacing some of the challenges that you're all experiencing. Great, so we've got that poll up now. Hopefully you can all access it. Right, so I'm going to leave that poll up. I don't know what's happening because I'm not seeing any results, but it might be because, here we go. Right. Yeah, so relationships and learning, really important. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Yeah, that's really coming across very strongly. So I'm going to hand over to Laura in a minute. Lou, could you just, brilliant. So just to say, my LinkedIn address is in the chat right at the very beginning, so you'll have to scroll all the way back. And do contact me and, you know, link in with me if you want to, or drop me a note. My email is there, and so is my mobile. And I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm just going to grapple with the technology briefly, so bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, Fab can see them, Laura.
Right, okay. So Keisha's going to be in charge of just making sure I pick up any questions that come in the chat, because I can only see my slides at the moment. So
that's it. So yeah, do feel free to write any questions, ladies, in the chat, or just raise your hand and we'll answer them as we're going. Well, Laura will.
Yeah. So thanks, Rachel. I think there's some really good stuff there. And we'll come back to some of the things that Rachel's talked about a bit later in my conversation. I have to apologise if you hear some banging in the background. I'm having some work done in the house at the moment. They promised me they wouldn't be banging while I was doing this, but unfortunately they seem to have forgotten. So bear with me if you hear a lot of banging. So as Keisha mentioned earlier, I'm Laura Lawrence and I'm the founder of Grange Consultants. I've worked a lot with Crimson over the years, but my career's kind of been split half and half between working for service providers and leading in-house IT teams. So on the service provider side, I've worked for Serco in IT and in business process outsourcing, and more recently with Computer Centre. And then within in-house teams, I've been CIO at Unipart, and I've run lots of change programs in quite a lot of sectors. And what links all of those things is people, process and technology, and change and transformation, whether that be SAP in the automotive sector or end user services in a highly secure environment. So taking that experience, I've set up an organisation called Grange Consultants, which helps customers get the most out of their service provider relationship. So today I'm going to focus on what we as technology leaders can, over probably a longer period of time than we've talked about in the pandemic, we can learn from the examples of the good and the bad and the ugly from large technology and infrastructure projects. And those have been before, during and after the pandemic. I'll then draw that back to what it takes to be a competent, successful technology leader post the pandemic. So my agenda, you can see there, I've already talked about the content and takeaways. I'm going to cover some high profile examples, which you will all have heard of, but we're going to get beneath some of the success factors of that. And then we'll talk about some of my own personal examples of projects as well. And then we'll bring that back to some of the key features of success and the features of a competent leader. And at that stage, I'm going to ask Rachel to help me just recap on how that relates to some of the things we've talked about. Then we'll spend a little bit of time me kind of postulating on what I think post-pandemic will look like, and a summary and conclusion. So some high-profile examples. These are some facts and figures. As I said, you will have heard of all these projects, but we're going to get beneath some of the success factors of this. So the Millennium Dome, located in Greenwich, southeast London, it was open to the public from the 1st of January to the 31st of December 2000. It cost £789 million versus a budget of £750 million. It was open on time on the 31st of December 1999. It was government-led, and there was a change of government in mid-1997 from Conservative to Labour, which we'll talk about in a minute. The strategy and vision was very much about a footfall of 12 million people to an exhibition with themed zones sponsored by various organisations. But unfortunately, it attracted barely half that footfall, and it ran out of money within a year. Consequently, because of that, but also before that, the public and press perception was very poor. It was called a white elephant, or a government vanity project, which is everyone's favourite expression. And the technology and transport failed on Millennium Eve, and many guests only arrived halfway through the event. The chief exec, the leader of it all in the Millennium Dome, was a lady called Jenny Page, who actually had huge experience working as chief executive of English Heritage. So she certainly had the right credentials. The second project I'm going to cover is the Olympic Games. The Olympic Delivery Authority, they were responsible for building the venues and the infrastructure at the Olympic Park, and they started all that construction in 2008. The cost of that was £8.9 billion, and it came in under budget by 377 million, which was a pretty huge achievement, particularly with the backdrop of all the financial challenges that various Olympic Games have had in the past. There was lots of really innovative technology in there, some things you may be aware of. There was a great ticketing system. They had robotic cameras used in the stadia. The electronic starting blocks were particularly innovative, that were used for the track events. And they had they used virtual cycling tech. So basically what that allowed the athletes to do was to train, in inverted commas, in the velodrome. And there was a huge national energy behind the project, and it attracted a lot of great people to work for the organisation. They had a clear strategy of regeneration, and that regeneration is still visible now in East London. They had an unencumbered, as I say, independence of the ODA, so there was very little government intervention. And they brought in a lot of external experts. So that was made up of a pretty transient team from many sectors. And they actually oversaw £6 billion worth of contracts to third parties. And the leader who you see there, Sir John Armitt, who's a really interesting guy, if you ever hear him speak, had huge experience in the construction industry and is an engineer by trade as well. And then my third example, the North East Nightingale Hospital opened during the pandemic, May the 2nd, 2020. It took a phenomenal 6 weeks from implementation from start to finish. Based in Sunderland, it had a patient capacity of 460 and has now been pivoted to become a mass vaccination centre. It took 80,000 hours of hard physical labour to construct, and just as many hours of clinical and operational thought to deliver that hospital ready to support the North East if it was needed. The chief exec that you see there, Jackie Daniel, she's got a master's degree in quality assurance in health and social care. She's also the chief exec of the NHS Trust in the North East, and she's a qualified business and personal coach. And I think that's one of the most awesome power poses I've ever seen of anyone. So. So just coming on to some of the lessons that we might learn from those three projects, I think it's pretty clear that the Millennium Dome had a poor vision and a poor strategy, unrealistic financial plans. They found it particularly difficult to get funding for the themed areas, particularly the faith area. Now, who would have thought faith area would be controversial? And the footfall estimates were obviously woeful as well. The political change and interference in the strategy was a major factor as well. So 3 months before the event, Tony Blair announced that a load of children would be given free tickets to the event on Millennium Eve. And that just set a precedent that most parents no longer expected to pay for their children to go to the Dome. So that intervention had a massive impact on the plans. And Tony Blair did say after the event, if I'd known then what I know now about governments trying to run a visitor attraction, it was too ambitious. The chief exec, Jenny Page, said, I made several attempts to persuade ministers that standing back from the Dome would be good for them as well as for the Dome. But eventually she did take the fall for the issues, and she was sacked as chief exec just a month after the Dome's opening. But actually, if you look back now, 20 years later, there's a very different perspective on the O2 Arena, which it is now. It was bought by AEG, and actually it's been the most popular music venue in the world every year since. So that perspective on success is interesting, isn't it? So the Olympic Games, just conscious of time, I'll whiz through these. You're probably all pretty much aware of this. A great vision and strategy right from the bid right through. The organisation had an independence and accountability about it that meant they could be a single interface with things like planning authorities, and didn't have intervention from complex governance models in central government as well. So they also assumed power for some aspects of the Olympic transport and security, which was a great lesson for them to learn from the Millennium Dome. And that independence gave them kind of flexibility and agility that underpinned its success. I've talked a little bit about Sir John Armitt. He is an interesting guy, well worth listening to. He was part of the Channel Tunnel and various other successful projects. But he said that successful programme management starts from the client, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The ODA knew what it valued, it balanced cost and quality, and it made that very clear to its suppliers. So he's quoted as saying, if you talk to the suppliers on the Olympics and they will say that the ODA was what he would call an intelligent or a competent client, with a consistency in the way they dealt with their suppliers and their contractual terms. And it's that consistency reinforced to the suppliers and the collaboration that was really key to their success. But it wasn't all plain sailing at all. So one of the biggest impacts on the Olympic Games was the financial crisis and trying to deliver the regeneration out of the back of the athletes' village. It was really difficult to get sensible financial packages out of the banks to support that athletes' village. So a decision was made to use government contingency money and then sell off the assets as soon as they could after, and that recouped the money. So a really good pivot story in there as well. And then coming back to the Nightingale Hospital, extraordinary speed to implement. What was really key to that was using existing full-time people that were involved in the NHS in the North East already, partnering with great experts. So, for example, they used local businesses, they used the armed forces, and there was a really great collaboration in there. But also taking some views on risk taking as well. So they did cut some corners on procuring equipment. So, for example, oxygen tanks were ordered before procurement procedures were in place, just because they wouldn't have had them in place in time otherwise. I think Jackie Daniel said there was a real sense of real sense of energy, determination and pride of the local community that was massively palpable.
Laura,
So
just
a great
comment
leader.
in the chat window from Hazel Oliver. So she said, I was part of the team who worked in 2012 on the Olympics management around transport of all the engineers, volunteers and athletes. It was a very well run project from start to finish and one of the best projects I've been part of.
Great. Yeah, good. Well, that's and was there anything else? Sorry, we'll come back to that. I'll carry on because otherwise I'm going to run out of time. I think the other thing about the Nightingale Hospital, which is interesting for us as technology leaders, and this definitely resonates with me, is that what Jackie Daniel said is that the enduring elements of the project that they've worked on in there is to consolidate recent developments they've made in digital technology and to pivot their focus so that they can make the biggest positive impact on health, wealth and the well-being of communities. So, and I think that's really important to remember those things out of the back of the pandemic. We've all changed and pivoted and worked really quickly, and to not forget the great work we've done on that. And I think testament to that, and I know she doesn't live in the North East, but my mother-in-law actually sent me a note the other day asking if she could have a consultation with her consultant on Zoom for the next one. So, and she's 84, so it can be done when you're in your 80s even. So a couple of personal examples here. I think the best way of describing these is that there are positive and less positive elements to all of them. So I'm going to highlight those. So the first one I'm going to pick up on is a high street retailer. You can see the picture there, a national logistics hub that was delivered in the early 2000s. It was a 24-hour national distribution centre with all the kind of transport provision around it, £8 million fit out. A really large, don't know if it means anything to you, 150,000 square feet warehouse managed by Unipart Logistics, and it employs more than 200 people there, but obviously more in seasonal times. We were setting up a whole system around retail and web capacity, and in the early 2000s that web capacity was just beginning to to grow. So that was kind of a new concept really when we were building the systems around it. The technology solutions there, so SAP was the technology of choice, and we had a sortation system very similar to what you see in the kind of Amazon warehouses now, but at that time was very, very innovative and required a lot of very precise design. Some of the testing around books on the sortation system was, well, frankly for me, quite fascinating, a bit sad, I guess. There was an ecosystem of 2 or 3 partners led by Unipart Logistics, but not all of them had experience, and this led to overspends by some of the suppliers. The leader from the customer point of view was a guy called Jerry Johnson, who was a very charismatic retail leader, and again, very interesting guy to read about. My second example, Network Rail, and this was the transformation of their end user technology. About £10 million investment about 6 years ago, transforming all of their 15,000 end users' devices, so that's laptops, desktops, peripherals, and that kind of thing. An ecosystem of 2 service providers, which should have been small enough to be really agile. And the initial phases in the headquarters were delivered on time. You can see there, that's their new headquarters in Milton Keynes. But the rollout to the engineering and remote sites were delayed, and that did lead to some overspend. And the CIO in there was a very well-respected leader called Susan Cooklan. So, good elements of the high street retailer. I mean, a very visionary strategy, and very good expertise in Unipart Logistics in delivering the kind of warehouse and the sortation system, and recruited a very high quality warehouse team in there. The processes were really well designed and worked through collaboratively across the 2 or 3 organisations, because there weren't that many parties involved. And as I said, this kind of visionary strategy from Jerry Johnson. However, the IT out the back of the processes was really overcomplicated and did delay the go live. And that was fundamentally because the IT development team weren't experienced in managing a tight remit from what was a very creative organisation. You think of retailers as kind of as kind of very hard people, but this retailer particularly was quite creative because of their products. And so to that extent, it didn't work well with an inexperienced service provider on the IT side, and what I would say a kind of not intelligent or competent client in managing that with them. And there were too many exceptions and too many tweaks, and so they didn't work well together on that. And then on the Network Rail side, we started off with what was a seemingly very clear strategy from the CIO. But unfortunately, the strategy and the procurement of a low-cost, standardised rollout didn't align with the culture and the behaviours of the organisation. And many areas of the organisation saw what we were doing as being done to, and were very resistant. So again, to that extent, not a particularly intelligent client. However, once we pivoted and aligned to the kind of business needs within there, that the right organisation was in place to deliver that kind of logistics solution. And actually, at the end of the day, there was a really high level of user satisfaction with the rollout. So although it was late and overspent, I think end users will have seen it as being successful. So that's a kind of romp through my examples. I'm just going to try and draw that back to what I think are the sort of the systemic successes, and just highlight where I think there were deficiencies in the projects I've talked about. So if we talked quite a lot about vision, strategy and outcomes. So capability, attitude and experience. Rachel talked a little bit about that. We'll come back to that in a minute. And that includes good judgment and decision making and all those great things you need. Accountability and clarity of roles. So aligned behind those roles and not too many people involved. And then the 2 on here, which I will harp on about again, risk management and intelligent client. So I heard a really great interview with Sir John Armitt about risk management. It wasn't quite what he called it, but he called it uncovering over optimism. And he said that nobody wants to go to work to do a bad job. And so when you're a leader in these large projects, you need to be aware that people are in the thick of it and they can't see the woods for the trees. So having that independent review and monitoring that and holding people accountable for their deliverables is really important. And this intelligent client equally so. Your intelligent client that leads your ecosystem of service providers are almost like an ecosystem of a leadership team in their own right. So that's important, and I think it is interesting that those two things come out as being deficiency across those projects. So Rachel, what do you think? How is that? Is there anything in there that relates back to what we heard earlier?
Right.
There?
Class.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, I came off mute and it put me straight back on it again. Yes, I can hear you. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, what the first thing that jumps out for me is know your context. So I think that goes back to, as a leader, you have to pay attention, and that goes back to that slide I showed, the complexity of the environment you're working in. Know your environment. So I think we can sometimes get stuck at focusing on our own stuff, so our own team, our own function, our own organisation, and we lose sight of the external context. So I think I'd say that's massively important. And I think my sense is the lesson we've all learnt this year is how important our context is. So definitely. And I think, you know, the other thing you point out is relationships, and I think that goes back to, again, risk monitoring and management. Knowing who you're working with, having the right relationships in place, paying attention to who we need to be working with, massively important. And great leadership, challenging question, isn't it? You know, what is leadership? And leadership is different things in different contexts, and we have to have all the muscles developed and be able to use them. It's a full body experience, so it's knowing the right levers to pull, the right muscles to use in the right context.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that resonated for me from what you said earlier was this direction, alignment and commitment, those three areas, you know, and all the mechanism underpinning it. So you're right. But you've given me a really great segue into my next bit, which is to talk about what it is to be a competent leader. So thanks for that, Rachel.
It's okay.
Were there any other questions just before I go on to that, Keisha, or shall I carry on?
I'm just double checking now. So yeah, the comments that I had was the from the lady from Hazel, which I mentioned earlier, around she was part of the team for the Olympics, and also Mignon just said that her husband received a jab at the Nightingale. So yeah, obviously two promising comments around both those projects.
Good. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna bring us back to the sort of people and leadership. Although I think, you know, definitely the whole people and systems piece is really important. So these are some key things which I think are important for us as technology leaders. I think it's important to be rational and calm, and you know, we've never needed that more than in the last year. To not be the centre of attention. So being leader isn't standing up there and telling people how great you are. It is about, you know, leading the people behind you and making them feel like they're part of your team, respect you, but a part of your team. Collaborate, we've already covered that in the kind of system areas. And then seeing the importance of the team and their behaviours, and that came out in all the groups that were talking anyway. So that whole, you know, pastoral care, you know, understanding the team, understanding what's important to people, that requires a lot of energy and time as well. But then, you know, holding that key team accountable, and that's probably the most difficult piece of being a leader, holding that team accountable, because when you feel part of a team and you know, you like working with the people you're working with, you know, it's always difficult to hold that team accountable, particularly when there's difficult situations. So how do we assess that? I think the easiest way of assessing a competent leader is to look at their execution ability, so their track record. But I think there's also a lot about demeanour that you can tell that somebody is a competent leader as well. How they interact with people, you know, the sort of presence they have, you know, their listening skills, those kind of things. But as I said, it isn't really enough just to be, you know, a competent leader. So these are my thoughts on the sort of systems to help you with your people skills. So spending a lot of time up front getting it right. Now, we talked in the breakout sessions about the time it's taken to do pastoral care. Well, I spend a lot of my career advising people on programs and getting them right from the start. And a lot of people say to me, but we just need to get on. We've got really tight timescales. And I say, but if you don't spend the time now trying to get it right, get the team together, get them all behind the direction, get some commitment from them, you'll never get the execution right. So that whole initiation and getting that right is very important. Reacting when things go wrong. So we talked a little bit about risk management systems. We talked about holding people accountable for things. And it is hard when you've got to make difficult decisions, but actually reacting quickly is the right thing to do. Even if you admit to people you might be overreacting, but it's better to overreact than wait until things go really wrong. That's a phrase I've used in the past. So that's really important in your systems. And then taking an invasive approach to performance reviews and risk management, which I've talked extensively about anyway. So those are my 3 takeaways for you. They've stood me in good stead in my career in all the programs I've worked in. So here's my take on what I think will stay and what will go post-pandemic. So I think all of the above that we've talked about in both Rachel's session and my session will still stay. I think there will be a pressure to continue that speed of change. And I think there will also be a lot of pressure on budgets and priority judgment calls. So I think going forward, decision making, risk management, and making those kind of calls against the outcomes you're trying to deliver will be important. And I think, you know, you can legitimately spend a little bit of time on that to make sure that you don't make mistakes. So unless there's any other questions, I'll just conclude actually, Keisha, and then I can take some other questions. So I think I've given you some things to think about that have come into sharper focus during the pandemic, but really I think the fundamentals are all still the same. I think I've tried to show you that competence and success are multidimensional, and here's my take on what multidimensional is on the left. And it's not enough to be a great leader. I'm going to kill the builders in a minute when they're and I'm self-aware that I'm going to kill them in a minute, so that's fine. So be self-aware, build a great team around you, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, where your resiliences are or maybe not, and build that team around you and make that a competent team that can also be a great intelligent client with your service providers as well. And if you want to talk about this a bit more, or if you've got some issues that I've brought out today that you think I'd really like to talk to Laura a little bit more about that, I'm really happy with this group to spend 30 minutes just talking through anything you've got, offer some perspective, listen to what your issues might be, and see if I can help you. And here are my details here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Laura. That was brilliant. And yeah, you got through with the builders, so you did really well. Have any of you ladies got any questions or comments for Laura? Well, Kerry's put, Laura, it sounds like they heard you in terms of the builders. Hazel, are you still with us? I'd be interested to hear a little bit around your time working on the Olympics project.
Have I stopped sharing, Keisha?
No, if you just click the cross on the share tray.
Oh yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm still here, Keisha.
Oh hi. Yeah, so I saw you commented as we were speaking, as Laura was speaking then. So yeah, I'll be interested in hearing a little bit more around your time on the Olympics project.
Yeah, so in 2012, when the Olympics was going, I was working for a company called Novacroft, and we were service providers for Transport for London. And Transport for London got involved with regards to making sure that all the volunteers, engineers, athletes, and that could be transported around the whole of UK wherever they needed to be, to the different venues and things like that. And we were the people who wrote the system to do that and coordinated all the logistics around it to make sure that everybody got their access cards at the right time, that they had places where they could go and renew it if they lost it. Overseas athletes were sent their access cards prior to them arriving in the UK, so everybody could get around. And it was a very successful project because we didn't have any issues and no comebacks. So everybody was very happy with the security and making sure that everybody could get where they needed to be on the right time at the right place, so it didn't impact negatively on the operations of the Olympics itself.
Great. And did you, just in terms of kind of how you did the testing for that and the risk management, did it feel like there was a client behind you who was looking at that and checking that you were fully testing your systems and your logistics?
Yes, I must say Transport for London was really on the ball.
Yeah.
They supported us every single way. We were their preferred supplier for this. They put us forward. We got introduced to the full Olympic Committee team, and they were very precise. They knew exactly what they wanted, and so it was a really well-run, managed project as well. And all the resources we needed were provided. It's very simply and on time.
Right. Yeah, Transport for London were one of my customers at Computer Centre, and I really enjoyed working with them. I thought they were a great bunch. Yeah, good. Yeah. Excellent. Oh, I love it when somebody's on that I'm talking about the subject I'm talking about. That's really good.
Has anyone else got any questions or comments for either Laura or Rachel? I suppose one question I had, Laura, was where you said to be a competent leader, you need to be self-aware and then kind of build the right team around you. Have you got any tips or kind of techniques to become more self-aware and know where your strengths are and where kind of the skills then that you need to hire around you?
I think particularly for technology leaders, that's multidimensional because obviously there's the technical element of it. And I always, from a self-awareness point of view, I always err on the side of caution from technical capability because I know that I am, I'm not extensively technically capable. So I always try and make sure, in fact, when I was working in Computer Centre, I had my choice, my little team of technical architects that I took with me because I knew they knew me. I knew that they would tell me how it was as well, which is what I wanted. So that, from a technical point of view, that's always been really important to me from a self-awareness point of view. I think that's more difficult when you start out your career because you find it difficult to be honest about the fact that you've got some deficiencies on that side, particularly in the technology industry. But you really don't. There's so many great technical people out there. You just need to build your network well to have people who you can use as a sounding board. And then from a management point of view, I've got a finance background, so I never really had a problem necessarily if I didn't have a great finance person on my project because I could always compensate for that. But I think I think I'm also aware that I quite like to get into a little bit of detail. So I did used to like people, and I'm working with two of them now at the moment, who used to tell me, will you just leave it alone and let me get on with this? I'll tell you what you need to get involved in. So, and over the years, that's something I've developed over the years, self-awareness of, if I'm honest.
No, that's really cool. And that's it, isn't it? I think when you first start out, you don't want to show that you've got kind of anything that you're not that great at. You want to be good at everything. But I think then as you kind of get more experience, you are more comfortable. Like, this is my strength area. And so I'm going to hire the right team around me and delegate. I think delegation's also a very kind of important.
It is ironic though, because when you're new in your career is the time when you can say to people, I really don't know, I'm not experienced in that area. And people normally respect that actually, but as you do get a few more grey hairs like me, you should really know. So
yeah, no, I agree. I guess I'll ask some people. So Kerry, how have you found leading through lockdown? Have you got anything that you've kind of been struggling with or challenges, or are you looking forward to things open up a little bit?
I've taken on board an investor during lockdown, never met them. Laura and Keisha, I think you know this particular individual, and I won't name him here, but having that trust in someone. So he's very technically competent, and I've been in a situation previously where I was working with a tech team who weren't technically competent, but I didn't know that they were able to pull the wool over my eyes. And that's just a process that unfortunately you've got to go through. You get your fingers burnt, you learn, and you move on. So I have found working with people remotely, but I have hearing issues as well. So that's been a particular challenge for me. I have to see people's lips move on the screen. So the telephones are no good. So Teams has been fantastic. I think having the right technology at your fingertips. So I have a huge screen. So when I'm talking to someone, it looks like they're in the room with me. And I've hired a team of people remotely as well. So I've taken on 3 people here in the UK. Up until last week, we'd never met. And that's been quite challenging. But I think we've all evolved and adapted and learned on our feet and moved rapidly, and I think it's been a learning curve for everyone. I think from a leadership perspective, I've learned to be more mindful of how my team are feeling. So we've come back to that pastoral thing again. I do wonder if leadership teams have changed, the dynamics in the leadership team and the skill set in the leadership team have changed as a result of what we've all been through in the last year. So do we now need more of those softer skills that perhaps are lacking in some leaders? I don't know, I can only speak for my organisation, but I do wonder if the team dynamics have changed as a result of what we've all been through.
Yeah. It's really interesting what you say there, Kerry, though, because we've all developed more of a propensity to ask for help around those skills, haven't we? And lots of people have got their own personal coach, but actually from a technical point of view, people don't tend to go to someone else to ask for a view, do they? And maybe that's something that we should develop as an industry. Maybe it's a business opportunity for somebody actually. To do independent technical reviews for people who are worried about, their own team's ability to, to see the wood for the trees. So I'll put it out there if anyone wants to develop that.
Yeah. I was part of an accelerator program, and it was for women in social tech. And it was very evident that support was lacking from that accelerator program. So I do think there's an opportunity there, Laura.
Well, I didn't think a business opportunity would come out of this morning, but there we go.
Happy to have a chat with you some more about my experience if it would help.
Yeah, let's do that.
Great.
It is interesting though, isn't it? Like the amount of people that are hiring or building those relationships over Teams. And even for me, like we've had new people join like the group and I've met them, but I actually forget that I've not actually met them in person because I feel like I've got close and built that kind of strong relationship with them. I'm like, actually, we haven't even met in person yet. It's weird, isn't it? Before lockdown, if I'm honest, I never used to really go on video in terms of Teams. You'd always go to workshops or meet people, and I'd be all around the country. In fact, all the time. So I'd be going to meet people in person, but I'm grateful for that in itself, that I've become kind of more on video and actually seeing people on Teams, because it makes such a difference with that kind of connection, relationship building, and just being able to see kind of their expressions and kind of knowing who they are. So even now, I know not everyone always wants to go on video. Sometimes I don't. I'm just I'm not feeling in the best way today. I'd just rather not go on kind of video. But I do feel like when especially when you're meeting people, it's nice to have that kind of video to build that relationship and see who they are. If not, like you said, Kerry, it's hard to speak. I find it hard now to speak on the phone, especially if I haven't seen them before, because it's weird for me now. It's a whole new era we're in.
It's hard to hear when somebody's smiling, but if you can see the face, you can see that positive affirmation, but you can't hear it on the phone. And I really struggle with that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We won't get onto face masks then, because I can't bear it. I'm often smiling behind my face mask and then realise no one can tell. So
you've got to tell in your eyes. They can see their eyes.
Totally. Has anyone got any other questions or comments?
Louise has got a question, I think. Lou.
Oh, sorry. Didn't ignore you on purpose there. Hi, Lou.
Don't be silly. I won't put my video on, but sorry for the person who needs extra support with the lip syncing. I'm just conscious I'm on my mobile, so you'll probably see it on my nose or something. It was just actually on the last person's comments around sort of management team, really, because I think actually one of the benefits of the pandemic and us all working in a more virtual remote world is that the need ever more, as it is anyway, for more diversity in senior management teams across, you know, all areas, really, whether it's sort of gender, ethnicity, or the LGBTQ sort of groups. I think it's really ever present that, you know, that requirement for businesses to have a real mix of diversity in their senior management team to encourage all of the different softer skills and you know, other areas that just unfortunately in certain disciplines and in certain management teams, as we know, in technology, just aren't apparent and still aren't always apparent today. And I think it's encouraged a lot more businesses to really address that much more quickly than you know, in a bit like most technology leaders who for the first time are probably getting their voices heard in some of the programs and some of the technology initiatives they've wanted to push out for a long time. The pandemic sort of escalated that, and they're getting the budgets approved, etc. I think similarly, businesses have really recognised that importance of that diverse spread, and I just wanted to add to that, really.
Yeah.
Point.
And I also I've heard a lot this morning, you know, the phrase softer skills. And I don't think they're soft. I think they're hard. I think they're the hardest skills. So I kind of like to reframe them as relational skills, because I think, you know, a lot of what we've talked about this morning is how we work with each other. Those social processes are often the most challenging parts of organizational life. So I think there's an opportunity to reframe the way we talk about things, and talking about relationships to get things done is really, really, really important from a leadership perspective. So perhaps we can start to change the narrative on that as well.
Yeah, the language is important. That's a great point, Rachel.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you for being involved and enjoying us first thing in the morning. I don't know why I put them in for this time, but I just went with it. So yeah, I used to do my evening events, now I've gone to first thing, so not sure what's going on, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for our amazing speakers, Rachel and Laura, again, for taking the time, but also for your help and kind of advice. It's been really great to hear from both of you. So before I wrap up, we've got our next event already in the diary and on our website ready to register. So I'll put the link in the chat window, or Holly will, but either one of us will put it in so you can sign up. Really interesting topic, which really is, I think it's important to me, but also I think a lot of people do feel this sometimes. So it's all around imposter syndrome. So how to build resilience and overcome imposter syndrome. And some of the most successful people actually do face imposter syndrome in kind of their day-to-day life, and it's just about how you can overcome it, some tools and tips to do that, but also looking at that self-talk, how we talk to ourselves is so key on a kind of daily basis, and also I guess what we're putting out in the message to the world as well. So two great speakers who are going to talk us through some tips and techniques to overcome imposter syndrome, to be as successful as we can as women and not let it hold us back. So I'm really excited for that one, because I think something that everyone can take away, no matter how successful you are, how developed you are in your career, you can always get it. So hopefully to see you there, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. You will get a feedback form through shortly. If you can fill that in, that'd be amazing. You're always looking for kind of new topics or what you want us to speak about next, or if you're open to speaking, that's great too. But hope to see you next time, and then again in future in person, which would be nice to have a drink together and do some socialising in person. But yeah, great, and thank you so much for joining us this morning, and have a great rest of your day. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Rachel and Laura.